Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
Essentially, we are the same.
There are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is life illuminated. By Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan. Acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians, a Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology, look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy is back. Alan Miller with you. We have a first-time guest and a very interesting guest, a very talented guest. I can speak from my own experience in that regard. But the Minnesota Twins, when they call up somebody from the minors, they go to Rochester, New York. Here in the Twin Cities, when we call up somebody from the majors, we go to the Mayo Clinic, and that's where Dr. Lucinda Gruber can be found, in the Mayo Clinic. And welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. As I said to you before we went on, we haven't had any of the female doctors from the Mayo, although I think there are probably more than there are males at the moment.
It's close. I think it's pretty close. Definitely in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a big push to recruit more women to medicine in general, but definitely at Mayo, that's been a big emphasis for them.
Now, you are an endocrinologist, which is a big word. Let's tell us all what that means.
So I like to think of endocrinology as the study of how different organs in the body talk to each other. So basically looking at how the body produces different hormones that then influence other organs in the body.
My organs pretty much say, I'm old, give me a rest.
Mine say that sometimes too.
Now, you are from Kansas originally. The Mayo, that sure ain't Kansas, Dorothy.
No, no, it is not. It is much colder here, but yeah. I knew when I was looking for a job, I wanted to stay somewhere in the Midwest, and I loved my interview at Mayo. I was very impressed with what they do there, and made the decision easy.
Walk us through from a farm in Kansas, literally from a farm, to the Mayo Clinic. How did we get there?
How did I get here? So I grew up on a farm. My dad farms is his primary occupation. My mom actually was a teacher, and when we were born, then she stayed home with us. So had a great education on the farm where we were just, encouraged to read, encouraged to think about things.
What do you farm?
So my parents have cattle, and then they have wheat, soybeans, corn. They do some sunflowers.
Doing very well with the soybeans at the present time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, President
Definitely
Trump.
so. Yeah. But yeah, so they have mostly crops, but then they have some cattle as well. Yeah. And then from there, I actually did my undergraduate degree.
You actually had to do work on the farm growing up, though.
Oh,
I mean, you were expected to hold down your portion of the responsibilities.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we took care of a lot of the animals on the farm and did a lot of work there. And
how many siblings?
So much fun. 2 siblings. So I have an older sister and a younger sister. I'm the middle child, so it's not true what they say about middle children. We get a bad rap, but yeah.
And from from the farm, you went to the University of Kansas, is that correct?
Kansas State, actually.
Kansas State.
Yep. So I started actually as a chemistry major, didn't really like it. I liked my math classes better, so then I ended up in engineering, actually, which is an interesting change, of course.
Biological engineering, though. What is biological engineering?
So it can kind of be whatever you want it to be. A lot of my classmates actually were chemical engineers, and so they work in the oil industry or the processing industry, food production. Some of my other classmates that were more in biological engineering work on manufacturing, like certain types of medical equipment or certain more kind of subspecialized things like that.
Is that what sort of whetted your appetite about medicine?
In some ways, to be honest, I always kind of knew that I wanted to be a doctor. I think I was sort of finding my way. I did an internship when I was in engineering, and I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I really couldn't see myself doing that long term. And so then I was like, well, maybe I should listen to this other voice that's saying, well, you know, maybe you should be a doctor.
Well, in college, a lot of us didn't know really what we wanted to do with the rest of our lives. But so you ended up at the University of Kansas Medical School.
Yeah, in Kansas City. Yeah, so I did 4 years there, long 4 years, very tiring 4 years, but I survived.
And from there, we went where?
And from there, it's actually interesting when you apply for residency, unlike other jobs where you interview and then decide, well, this is where I want to go. For medicine, you actually interview at a lot of different places, and then you rank the programs in the order that you like them, and then they rank the candidates in the order that they like them. And there's some fancy match that I do not understand, but a name gets spit out, and this is where you're going. So that's how I ended up at Mayo, actually in internal medicine.
And you actually ranked Mayo #1.
I did.
After your interview, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the place is overwhelming.
It is, yeah.
Having spent a good part of 2018 going back and forth to the Mayo, you know, I can attest to that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place to work, and I think they have the right values as far as the needs of the patient come first, and that's our first and foremost principle.
That's the one thing that really impressed me the most, is that patient first. Also the thoroughness.
Yes.
You go in there with a hangnail and you go through 4 or 5 divisions where they check everything else before, and really in my case it was very fortuitous because they found that I had a cancerous thyroid, which is not what I was in there for.
Right.
And so moving on, any of the siblings in medicine, by the way?
No. Yeah, I had, my granny was a nurse, but other than that, really no one in medicine in the family. So my older sister's an engineer, and my younger sister has her PhD. So we all went kind of different ways, which is okay.
And what's doing down on the farm? What's doing down on the farm?
Oh, my dad's still working. So he's still hard at it.
You all left him with the cows and the soybeans that China is now outselling us on.
And my mom to support him emotionally. So yeah, no, they work together on the farm, and then I have a first cousin who helps them out quite a bit, actually. But yeah, none of us went into farming.
Now we talk about small farms today, family farms, because even with this government bailout of $4.2 billion, whatever it was, I see that the bulk of the money has gone to these big corporate farms, and very little has filtered down to the people that need it the most, the small family farms. Has that been your folks' experience?
Well, you know, I think farming has always been a challenge, at least in my memory, you know, as a kid growing up on a farm. One, because there's so much overhead. So you have the land, you have all of the equipment and things like that. And it's very challenging, and it's hard work. And, you know, I saw my parents going through the late 80s, the early 90s, where they really weren't making a lot of money on the farm. And now, you know, there was a big boom in the farming community in the last, you know, probably 5 or 8 years. and things are kind of now slowing down. So it's been very challenging.
And what about weather as a factor, or water as a factor?
Or
on
lack
the
of
farm?
water.
Or
Yeah.
lack of water.
Yeah,
In
so-
Kansas, certainly.
Yeah, so last year, drought was what everyone was talking about, and then this year it's been too much water, so I mean, it's just rained so much that everything's been delayed getting into the field. So yeah, other than
All of
other
these
jobs you don't
things
rely
factor
on.
in on the pocketbook in terms
Definitely.
of the farm. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, and you never know, in March what kind of year it's going to be until October, when you're sitting down and you're like, okay, now we know.
And hopefully we've been able to harvest everything by then. Yeah.
Hopefully. Not always.
That's it.
Not always.
So we have gotten to the Mayo Clinic, and obviously you had your doctor's degree, you had your MD by then. So where did you start at the Mayo? And let's take us through that.
Okay. So I was an internal medicine resident, which is a 3-year program. And you do actually a pretty wide variety of things in internal medicine. So you see patients in the hospital, you see patients in the clinic, you spend some time in subspecialties, so like cardiology, gastroenterology, neurology, and you just get exposed to a wide variety of things so that you're very competent when you leave your residency that you could do general medicine. So you could be a primary care provider, you could work in a hospital.
If you wanted to go out to some other location or set up a practice or something, which nobody can afford to do anymore.
It would be a challenge, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then the nice thing about those 3 years too, you learn a lot about, well, what kind of doctor do I want to be? Do I want to subspecialize? Do I want to work in a more academic place? Do I want to work in private practice? And that gives you some time to kind of figure that out. Honestly, when you leave medical school, you sort of have an idea, but I think a lot happens in those 3 years.
It's like the same as with law school. You have no idea what the practice of law is.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like to say when I'm going up to the desk, I'd like to see the doctor, and then obviously the person at the desk says, which doctor? And I said, no, an MD, please. I'm not into witch doctors. But,
Me neither.
it works all the time. It's like cutting, breaking the ice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They need a little humor up at the desk sometimes, so that's good.
So you finished your 3-year residency, and then what happened?
Then I actually did an extra year as a chief resident, and I always say it's the best job I ever had.
And what does the chief resident do? You
So
were picked as the chief resident at the Mayo Clinic.
one of 4, yeah. So we work very closely with the residents, and we really do a lot of things. So it's partly administrative, so you're helping with scheduling, you're helping with vacation and arranging time away when residents need things. It's kind of like being a supervisor as well, so kind of checking in with people, making sure that they're doing okay, and then you spend a lot of time teaching. So you do a lot of...
Over how many residents does the supervising resident?
We had 176 when I was a chief.
Four of you?
4 residents overseeing 176 residents.
And you said something about teaching. So what is it that you're teaching now as a chief resident?
Well, it's a combination of different things. So you teach on the hospital service. So, if you're seeing a patient who has kidney failure, then you talk about, well, what are the different causes of kidney failure, and what are some of the different tests that we can do to figure out why this is happening? And then you also do more formal teaching where you're sitting down in a lecture hall and you're talking about, when we see a journal article, how do we appraise the article and figure out, is this a well-done study that we can basically apply to our patients, or is this a study that maybe has some shortcomings that we can
Do we write
ignore?
articles also during this period?
Oh yeah. So that's also a big part of what we do as trainees and even as physicians.
Getting published is very important. It is in the law as well.
Kind of
For
progressing.
your credentials, right?
Yeah, exactly. Figuring out new things and new answers to problems, and then sharing it with other people. Yeah.
And then this best residency, best job in the world came to an end.
It did. It was very sad.
And what was the next step?
So I actually went on to fellowship then, and so I'm in my second year of endocrinology fellowship.
And what's the fellowship involved?
So, you know, as I said, when you finish a residency, you're trained to do a wide variety of things, and you have the option of saying, you know what, I'm ready to get a job now and start working full time. But for me, I wanted to get some additional training, and I knew that I wanted to get additional training in endocrinology because I love the study of hormones.
And you certainly didn't want to go back to the farm, so...
And I decided that farming was probably not for me, and I'd invested a lot of time in medicine at that point. So then I applied for fellowship, and so I'm doing a fellowship at Mayo.
And how long have you been doing that?
I'm at the start of my second year.
And how long does the fellowship last?
3. Mm-hmm. And at that point, then...
And then? Well, you might
then
stay.
you're ready.
You
Yeah.
might stay at the Mayo forever, though.
I hope so. I mean,
You're working with
it's
some of the most talented doctors in the world in the field that you have chosen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. A lot of, you can walk down a hallway and you can find 3 or 4 experts in different areas, and you can just knock on a door and say, hey, can I talk with you about something?
Names that would be recognized by doctors worldwide.
Yeah.
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 And,
Yeah, so it's very humbling to work in an environment like that, but very powerful at the same time.
endocrinology encompasses, as you said, it's sort of opens up how all the organs work.
Yeah. Yeah, so we do, a lot of study of different glands and hormones, so thyroid, pituitary, pancreas falls under our realm, so we see patients with diabetes.
I think we met on a thyroid round.
I think
If
we
I'm
might
not-
have, yeah.
We're not, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah, yeah, so that kind of all falls under our
Right.
purview.
But you're not the surgeon, and you weren't the surgeon in my case, but you worked with the surgeon in terms of what came back in terms of the blood work and the residuals, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually one of the interesting things about Mayo is that the surgeons and the medical doctors work very closely together. So we actually have an integrated system where the surgeons see patients on our floor of the Mayo building. And so we have a chance before they even meet a patient to say, hey, let me introduce you to this patient. Let me tell you, kind of what our question is for you, and kind of propose some ideas of how we can go about helping this patient.
Speaking of on your floor, the Mayo is going to have 11 more floors
Yes.
in one half of the 2 buildings. There's the Mayo building, and what's the other one?
The Gonda.
The Gonda building, yeah. And it's the Gonda building that's getting 11 more floors or
I
something
think
like
so.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is going to encompass, I guess, operating rooms and
Some clinical
patient
space.
staying, patient rooms, and a lot more facilities to expand some of the divisions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be a big expansion, I think.
And it's so huge now.
Yes.
It's well, Rochester is what, 100,000 people. It's going to double the size of Rochester.
It might.
Good time to be in real estate in
Right.
Rochester.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're talking about a place that doesn't have a doctor, has 3,200 doctors.
Yeah.
How many in endocrinology?
Oh, man. I actually am not sure. I think there are roughly like 100 providers, actually. Yeah, so it's quite a few. That's pretty big, actually, for an endocrine division. Don't quote me on that number, but one of the biggest
You've already been
endocrine
quoted.
divisions. But definitely one of the biggest endocrinology divisions in the country.
And how many of those endocrinologists are females?
It's roughly, I think, like a third at this point. But if you look
the
at...
face of medicine has changed so much in the last several decades.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you look at, the 1980s compared to now it's actually like 50% of medical school applicants and medical school participants are women. So there's been a huge shift in the last, 30 years.
That's really, I have seen that shift. I had members of my family all of whom, I was the black sheep, I went into law, but they were all doctors. And literally we had 5 doctors among cousins and uncles and things like that, all male. The females were not doctors in those days. Today it's just a different side of the coin.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I think too, because there's been this shift and more women are in medicine, I think there are a lot of supports in how do we make this a helpful working environment for women and encouraging them to stay in medicine. So kind of recruiting them from when they're high school students, being like, you know, you should think about science, math, engineering, medicine, and then keeping up with things so that
Of course,
interest
the
is
face
still
of
there.
medicine is really changing greatly with modern and really new innovations. I guess they've come into your field as well.
Definitely, yeah.
For instance?
So one of the most amazing things, I think, advances in insulin pump technology. And so our ability, instead of just relying on 4 shots of insulin a day for someone with diabetes, now you can basically give them short spurts of insulin throughout the day, and you can control their blood sugar almost like a pancreas. We're not quite as good as the pancreas. The pancreas is quite good, but that technology has really changed. Even since I started fellowship, things are really coming out that are going to change how we think about diabetes and how we treat diabetes.
And of course, if you want to buy your insulin, you get on a bus with Bernie Sanders and go to Canada, where you can get it for 10% of what it costs here because of the lock that the pharmaceuticals have on a medicine and medicines.
Yeah, it is a huge challenge because you can write a prescription, but you never know with 100% certainty, is that patient going to be able to afford their medication, or are we going to have to prescribe an alternative because of expense?
And the medication that I was prescribed when I finished with my treatment at the Mayo was something that would cost me about $350 to $400 a month. And it was sent to Canada with the doctor's permission, and I now get 8 months out of the same amount of money.
Wow.
And that is an incredible difference, but what a difference that can make to somebody's budget or even their ability to stay alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you're thinking about things like insulin that people have to have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is it that you're researching and working on right now?
So a few different things. So I'm actually working in one of the biochemistry labs, Dr. Jim Maher's lab. And he does a lot of work in the realm of certain genetic variations and how those variations can cause a rare type of endocrine tumor called paraganglioma. And so it's been interesting because I'm actually working in the lab. Most of the research that I've done in the past is looking at patient-related data, but this is actually looking at things on a very microscopic level, which is also very humbling because you realize how long it takes to really, 1, build up the skills to do that, and 2, to really see, okay, here's where my experiment is headed, here's where our next step will be. So it's impressive that people have dedicated their whole careers to basically advancing a lot of this knowledge, because it's hard work.
A lot of the Mayo, large portions of it are really devoted to science and the improvement of science and experimentation, and some of the best known drugs were actually, I think there was a Nobel Prize that the Mayo won.
Cortisol, yeah.
For cortisol, was that?
Yeah.
And all developed within, so, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely a very important part of what we do.
So you're Nobel in the future.
I don't know about that. We'll see. I've been in the lab for 1 month, so I don't know that we're quite to a Nobel Prize at this point.
Well, you know, it takes time, but you got to get your feet wet.
Yeah, yeah.
Which you do regularly because you're a runner.
I do like to run. Yeah.
And you run in
Yeah.
good weather and bad weather.
Yeah.
I didn't know that talent existed with you, but I am not surprised at all.
Yeah. I stop running outside usually by about November. It gets a little too cold to do that, but otherwise, yeah. really enjoy that.
And what's this about biking, though?
Oh, so I recently took up biking. This is very new. It's about 2 weeks old, but I've had a lot of fun. I've actually been on a few trails here in the cities, so around the Mississippi River, and very fun. Great trails here.
Yeah, that's one thing about it. In particular, Minneapolis has some really great
Yeah.
bike trails.
And beautiful trails.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
So
so you come up from Rochester to bike here in the Twin Cities.
yeah. So
Fortunately, I mean, from our house, it's only like 70 miles to the Mayo, so
Yeah.
we're very fortunate to have that facility here in Minnesota, which is not only the best in the country, but the best in the world in many, many different areas. I don't know about endocrinology, but it certainly has a good rep.
yeah, I think we do have a good reputation. I think we took very good care of patients, and really that's what it's about. You know, we don't do it for the reputation, but I think we have a lot of expertise in different areas within endocrinology, and that's what bring a lot of people in, you know, looking for answers, looking for hope, and that's what I think we do
We've
really
made
well.
such advances in medicine, particularly in the last decade even. Not only the heart, but in so many other, we were talking about, you know, insulin and diabetes and other areas where what used to be closing the door on life really is just a chapter now. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
what are you going to do when you're finished with your fellowship?
That I don't know. I'm still figuring that out. I think in the long term, I'm really interested in the pituitary and adrenal glands. So I think that's where my subspecialty will be. Some of the really interesting patients that I've met, even in my first year of fellowship, have had pituitary or adrenal issues. And one of the things that I really like is that a lot of those conditions are treatable. So it's something that, you know, you're meeting with patients on a regular basis, and you get to know patients over the course of their lifetime, helping them with these different issues
and keeping them alive and finding solutions and
Yeah.
finding answers
Helping them
and
feel well.
curing their problems. Yeah. And
so
it's not only a great goal, but you might just do that staying at the Mayo.
yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I've enjoyed working there, and it's been very rewarding.
Well, it's been a pleasure. And
Thank you.
Any final thoughts as we wind this up?
Don't say that I'm going to win a Nobel Prize.
You never know.
But you never know. Yeah.
You never know.
So
Eureka, I found it.
you'll hear that coming from the lab. Yeah.
I bet you will. Yeah. You happen to be working with somebody who's got a worldwide reputation also, so that
Yes.
doesn't hurt either.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely doesn't hurt.
Dr. Lucinda Gruber, Mayo Clinic, female endocrinologist, and good luck to you, and thank you for sharing with
Well,
us.
thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Okay.